Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Navarro, and I'm joining you from Oregon. It's Wednesday evening for me, and I'm hoping to be able to share my slides soon with everyone. But to give some background, I am the regional sudden oak death pathologist for the U.S. Forest Service here based in Oregon. We have sudden oak death here in Oregon. We've had it since 2001. I'm going to go through the history of our program as well as some of the new technologies that we're using soon once we can get my screen share to work. So thanks everyone for bearing with me. Okay, so hopefully folks can see my screen now. I'll get started. Thank you for inviting me to give this presentation to this group. It's the first time I've joined in, and it's great to be a part of this collaborative group and just talking about Phytophthora issues on the landscape. So today I'm going to give a presentation on utilizing multiple landscape level detection and modeling tools for the management of Phytophthora ramorum in Oregon, the causal organism of sudden oak death. Although I'm giving this presentation today, the work presented here would not be possible without the other people listed on this slide, including Devin Gatos with North Carolina State University, Alan Kanaski, former forest pathologist with the Oregon Department of Forestry, Danny Norlander with the Oregon Department of Forestry, and Eric Rounds with the U.S. Forest Service. Oregon's Sudden Oak Death program has been highly collaborative since the beginning in 2001, and we continue to benefit from the great work of everyone involved. And today I'm going to give a short overview of our Phytophthora management program in Oregon, and then highlight two new projects that have recently been completed using new tools and technology to assist us in disease management across the landscape. So sudden oak death caused by Phytophthora ramorum was discovered in 2001. But it's been in Oregon since 1998. We've not been able to determine how the disease got to Oregon, but it was likely a result of infected nursery plants being brought into Oregon from our neighbor to the south, California. There was a second introduction to our Oregon forest about 19 kilometers north of any known infestation in the Cape Sebastian area in 2009-2010. And then we've had a third introduction, a brand new lineage of the disease or new strain of Phytophthora ramorum, the European lineage, in 2013. Prior to 2013, all infestations in Oregon were the North American strain. And so this is the first record of the European strain in wildlands in North America. And so sudden oak death, this disease is driven by tan oak, is the key species in our Oregon forest, Notholipocarpus densiflorus, and it's readily infected by Phytophthora ramorum, and then subsequently killed by Phytophthora ramorum, and it's the main spore producer and the driver of the disease on our landscape. We have many other native plant species that are susceptible and can get a variety of different foliage symptoms as well as canker development, but it's only really when they're growing in close proximity to our infected tan oak, and they're not regulated in the same sense that tan oak is in our Oregon landscape. And so these include Rhododendron macrophyllum, Pseudosugum invasii or Douglas fir, Abies grandis, grand fir, and Oregon myrtle, Umbularia californica. And one thing to note so California does have sudden oak death as well in their forests, and the Oregon myrtle or Umbularia californica is the driver of the disease in their landscape, but we don't really see it doing much here in Oregon. And so tan oak, the infection starts in the canopy of our tan oak trees with small stem and twig infections. Spores are produced, the spores then rain down onto the trunk of the tree, and the spores then go into the bark and cause stem girdling cankers, which then ultimately leads to mortality of tan oaks. From the time of initial infection to when we see mortality can be anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years, really making detection of the disease difficult. And so the Sunnoka program in Oregon forests consists of 5 components: survey and detection, the limitation of infested sites, treatment of those sites, regulation and education, and continuing monitoring and research. All work is done collaboratively between the state Departments of Forestry and Agriculture and then federal agencies such as the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, as well as universities such as Oregon State University, and then most recently our collaboration with North Carolina State University. Most of the original discoveries of sudden oak death were by aerial surveys with ground verification, but the program now relies on multiple survey methods to detect new infestations as early as possible. These still include aerial surveys, ground-based transects, stream monitoring, and now remote sensing techniques. Overall, our program has received just over $25 million in funding since 2001 for survey detection and treatment of the disease, in addition to research dollars. So I mentioned aerial surveys are our prime method for early detection of sudden oak death. To manage it on our landscape, we fly one fixed wing survey every year and then 4 helicopter surveys. We are GPS marking each individual red and dead tan oak, so newly dead tan oak on the landscape, as you'll see in that top right photo, and then we go and we ground check each and every one. This is our main method of early detection because the symptoms are cryptic in the beginning of infections. So as I mentioned, aerial surveys, we can cover a lot of ground, but we're not always catching those infections early enough. So ground-based transect surveys really are highly effective for early detection, but they're very costly. Ground surveys it takes about a 2 to 3 person crew to cover about 15 to 30 hectares per day. So treatment of the disease. So once we've found a newly infested site, we then go in and we propose a treatment area. The limitation and treatment are intended to completely eliminate the pathogen from infested sites. Treatment for this disease on our landscape includes cutting, piling, and burning tan oak within a specified buffer. Early on, we defined these treatment buffers of 30 to 90 meters from infected trees. We then moved to a standard 90-meter buffer partway through the effort, which equates to about 2.4 hectares. And recently, we've conducted treatments up to 180-meter buffers or 10.5 hectares. And these are much more effective at containing the disease, which was published recently in Hansen et al. 2018. Since 2001, the program has treated approximately 3,000 hectares to slow the spread of this disease in Oregon. Because the treatments are so labor intensive, they're also highly costly. So they cost between $6,000 to $10,000 per hectare. And at the current time, there's no cost to private landowners where the treatment is required under our quarantine regulations. The state picks up the cost of those treatments, but there's also no compensation for loss of tan oak from the site. And we know from experience that eradication treatments can eliminate the disease from a site and slow the spread if infections are detected early and treatments are completed promptly and at the proper scale, which, depending on funding levels, like anyone in natural resource management knows, can be a challenge. So in Oregon, we regulate the spread of sudden oak death under our state quarantine rule. It's managed under the regulatory authority of our state Department of Agriculture, and it requires private and state landowners to treat sudden oak death on their property. This was originally put in place in 2001 with the initial goal of complete eradication, but transitioned to a slow the spread campaign in 2012. Over the years, the quarantine has expanded to reflect the spread of sudden oak death, and in 2015, the quarantine was expanded to its current boundary of about 1,300 square kilometers, or 30% of the county jurisdiction down there. Since 2001, sudden oak death has spread 29 kilometers to the north and 13 kilometers to the east. We have kept the disease in a portion of Curry County compared to California, our neighbor to the south, where 15 county jurisdictions are currently under federal quarantine. In 2017, we had one of the largest wildfires in Oregon go through our sudden oak death area. We had about 27% of current and past infested sites affected by the fire boundary. It was a scattered mosaic in terms of burn intensity, and so some of our sites did burn up completely. Oregon State University is currently looking at the inoculum levels in the soil and in vegetation after this fire went through, and so far they've been able to find ramorum inoculum on about 50% of the sites that they've looked at. And so we also know from risk modeling that sudden oak death does have the potential to spread throughout the range of tan oak in Oregon, which includes 4 other counties to the north and the east. And so currently in 2020, we are focused on this northern edge of infestations. We are currently treating everything from Cape Sebastian north there. And so this is what our risk map looks like for Oregon. And so the risk is there for other counties, and so we continue to try to slow the spread of sudden oak death in Oregon, given the resources that we have. And so we now know what happens once we cease treatments. So in the initial infection area, we now have designated it the generally infested area, and it's a site under our quarantine regulations where treatments are no longer required. And so this is a high resolution image of an area in 2012 where we ceased treatments. So you'll see in this image, the pale green is tan oak, the bright green is alder, and the dark green is Douglas fir. And you'll see that there are a couple brown trees scattered throughout the light green stands of tan oak. Then move forward 3 years, you see 50% mortality in the tan oak stands. With the gray, dead tan oaks have been dead a couple years, and then still some brown trees that have recently died. And then now from just this year, you see that many of those stands have now been taken over by brush or other species such as alder, and in some cases, you can't even tell that there was a stand there. And so these are all roads too that are privately owned, and so they're not maintained by any sort of government resource. And so they're one way in, one way out. And when that wildfire came through in 2017, many of these communities were on edge because the fire came pretty close to these communities, and there was a lot of fuel on the ground. And so because of this, because of the potential for economic impacts, Oregon formed a sudden oak death task force in 2016. And the mission of the task force was to develop a collaborative-based strategic action plan, including securement of additional resources to contain the NA1 strain of Phytophthora ramorum, and with the goal to eradicate the EU1 strain in the county using the best available science. And so they formed 6 different subcommittees, each tasked with addressing different issues of sudden oak death, and a strategic action plan was adopted in 2017. And these included subcommittee recommendations and funding requests and recommendations. And we have been successful through the strategic action plan. We've received an additional $2 million in research funding for Oregon State University. And we've also conducted a new economic impact assessment for Oregon. So this area of our state is heavily forested, and there's a lot of ecological and cultural implications to potentially losing the entire species of tan oak. But what's most concerning to many of the people in the area, including stakeholders within our task force, is the potential economic repercussions. A lot of the economy in this area is based off of timber harvesting as well as timber export. And if the strain of, if Phytopthora ramorum were to spread north into the neighboring county, the whole county could be placed under federal quarantine, which could have implications to the deep water port and timber exports out of that county. And so based off of those implications, the economic impact assessment found that there could be a potential loss of 1,200 jobs and a loss in about 58 million in annual wages per year if the port was to be shut down from sanctions from other countries not wanting to accept the timber export. In addition, if the disease was to spread further, impacts the cultural practices with great historic and traditional meeting to our native tribes in Oregon, including acorn gathering, materials for basket weaving, and traditional hunting grounds. And some of these are already being compromised by sudden oak death because of the fear of moving the pathogen out of the area. And then also reduced rural residential property value and the loss of real estate transactions if the disease was to exacerbate in these areas further. And so because of this economic impact assessment and the new interest and enthusiasm from our stakeholders, Oregon Sudden Oak Death Group was invited to participate in new research being done at the Center for Geospatial Analytics at North Carolina State University. They're using new technology to create participatory modeling scenarios for stakeholders to engage in large landscape level issues, to address large landscape level issues. And so in our case, looking at disease management across the landscape, creating both a interactive table form as well as a web-based platform as well. So I'm going to present on that right now. And this work that I'm going to be presenting was done by Devin Gatos for her PhD dissertation, presenting it with her permission so that we can present to a broader audience than we normally get to here in the States. And so she recently completed her degree this past May and is working on publishing all of this work. Some of it has been published, and so I have the citation here, and the slides will be available for folks afterwards to take a further look. And this work, like all the work in Oregon, was highly collaborative, and the Oregon SOD program and the stakeholders of the task force welcomed the opportunity to participate in these workshops. So we hosted 2 workshops here in Oregon, and the goals were to assess how participants interacted with the disease model and the different systems, as well as systematically collecting stakeholder input to refine the model and the user interface, both the tabletop tangible landscape interface and the web-based platform as well. And so the tabletop interface is known as Tangible Landscapes. And so it's a geospatial participatory modeling platform, and it encourages collaborative learning and empowers stakeholders to interact more directly with models, where in the past models are we're typically used to seeing them as lines of code. And so this gives people that interactive way to work with them. It's all open source, so anyone can make their own tangible landscape model. You just need a projector, a 3D scanner, which in this case was using an Xbox Connect, and then GIS skills, and then an actual like tabletop model. And so in this case, we used a 3D printed landscape model that was placed on a tabletop, but you can also just use a image projection as well. And so for the Oregon workshop, for the very first one, we used our EU1 strain area where we're doing the most management, modeled disease spread 5 years post-treatment, and all participants took turns coming up with treatment scenarios based on different funding levels that were given to us. And so what does this look like in practice? And so for sudden oak death, this is a model, or it's the ortho imagery of our we're looking at this area a lot. And so we have the yellow on this photo, that is the initial EU1 infestation that we had in 2016. The red pieces of felt that you see in the top right are proposed treatment areas. And so the 3D scanner will scan the image once you place those pieces of felt on the table, and they will then put it into the model as a proposed treatment area, and then run the disease forecast simulation from there. And so what you do is you place the piece of felt right on top of where you want your treatment, and then you hit the green button to run the model. And then the model will run its projections of what it thinks will happen within the next 5 years. And so this was the first iteration of the workshop. And so we decided to try the host barrier because a lot of people in within our stakeholder group asked, like, why don't you just treat a large swath of tan oak to try to stop the spread of sudden oak death? And so after this first workshop, with the core science team was invited, we recommended a few improvements for being able to forecast the strains of the disease separately, incorporate yearly adaptive management, because in this case, it wasn't just like we were doing on the ground. We're treating year after year here in Oregon. We don't treat once and then treat again in 5 years like the model ran. And so we asked for the capability to treat 1 year, run the disease forecast, treat the next year, run the disease forecast again. And then we also asked for the development of an additional web interface. All of us may not have access to this type of equipment, although it was very fun to use. It's not something that I can justify setting up here in Oregon. And so we asked for the development of an additional web interface so that anyone can use, any of the pathologists here in Oregon or even in California can use this to prioritize disease management. And so we had a second stakeholder workshop. And so we had a tangible landscape station where we were looking at just the EU1 strain, and then we had a web platform-based station where we were looking at just the NA1 strain. And so participants were split into 2 groups and sent to either station, and then they swapped in the afternoon. And just like in the previous workshop, stakeholders filled out questionnaires, which allowed everyone to gauge the preference of the systems. And as I mentioned too, the tangible landscape station and the platform, you can now do yearly treatments, and it was run over the course of 4 years. Each of the groups were split pretty equally amongst the sudden oak death task force themselves. So we had politicians join in, other land managers, other people who are who not always directly engaged with sudden oak death management, but people from watershed councils who had an interest and were part of the task force all came together to participate in this workshop. So we had about 30 people. The pathologists were split up so that they could help people out just with the general history and background of sudden oak death. But overall, everyone had a very positive experience from this and came out with some very good things to say. And so the web interface and the tangible landscape interface share a lot of the same capabilities. In both cases, you're running the same forecast with the same underlying data. The treatments and the adaptive management work the same, and the visualization spread is about the same as well. However, there are a couple key differences, and we did see that throughout this workshop. First is that the tangible platform is more static because it's a physical setup. You can't really zoom in, pan around into the study area like you can in the web platform. But the main difference, and one of the positives that a lot of people spoke about, is how the group can interact with each other. It's a lot more physical and moving treatment pieces around and testing things and talking more. But with the web platform, the group has to have a dedicated single mouse controller. So someone who's driving the car. And so in some cases, especially if people aren't used to drawing polygons in a GIS system, it's a little bit more clunky for a group to use together and have those more dynamic conversations about it. However, it does lend itself to give more instant readouts as well. And so some scenario examples of what the groups decided to do. Teams were given a set of budgets to work under for a 3-year basis. They were given $1 million as well as $5 million. One of the least effective runs was the host barrier, which I decided to show here. And then one of the most effective was front loading the treatments in year 1 and covering more land-based, and then doing more spot treatments in the other 2 years. And so next steps on how the Sunnoka program is using these types of models. The Oregon Department of Forestry submitted a state funding or a budget request based on the best scenario of that model output. And so it's going to be put forth in front of the state government next year for funding. We're still awaiting the official launch of that web-based platform, also known as POP, Pest or Pathogen Simulation. And so this is the URL for that model, and it's going to be up and running pretty soon. It was running under a grant with Google, but with COVID research taking precedence, they're kind of on the back burner for right now. So they're trying to work and get that up and running. And then we are continuing to use these new disease forecasts that are specifically made for Oregon for treatment prioritization, and also prioritizing on the ground transect survey areas as well. And so the next new technology that I wanted to share with the group is the remote sensing project here in Oregon. And since 2012 and the establishment of that generally infested area that I showed with the high resolution imagery earlier, the Oregon SOD program has obtained high resolution 4-band digital imagery in order to monitor disease spread where extensive surveying is no longer done. In addition, augment aerial survey efforts and identify potentially resistant tan oak trees in heavily affected areas. Since 2018, we've been working with the geospatial group within the U.S. Forest Service to assess the viability of using imagery to create 3D point clouds and canopy surface models to see if we can detect canopy infections before whole tree mortality. So could we use the imagery that we've been obtaining to find branch mortality versus whole tree to then detect even earlier new infestations? We also wanted to create a workflow to classify declining and dead tan oak trees more easily and rapidly, and if possible, even live tan oak as well, to make our host maps better for our risk models and disease forecasting. And then we also wanted to evaluate and quantify the extent and spread of sudden oak death by year. And so some of the outcomes of this project, so the 3D point cloud, also known as structure for motion or SFM, unfortunately, this workflow was generally unsuccessful for this project, but it could be potentially used in the future if the imagery was collected for this use. The images did not have enough overlap in them in order to make the 3D canopy images. So you can see in the photo on the top, there's those gray areas within the red circles. So that's areas of no data. And so this year for 2020, we worked with our imagery vendor and we did collect a subset of photos to be able to redo this workflow and hopefully get this working this year. Also, we were able to develop a new workflow for creating imagery mosaics and then running structured classification tools to identify recently dead tan oak as well. And so although it's not 100% perfect, there are still errors, but the supervised classification of dead tan oak does aid in image interpretation, and the digitization of dead tan oak versus bare ground is pretty easy to pick out. And so that's one issue that we have had in the past and that we identified early on in this, is that recently red dead tan oaks are the same color as bare ground in this area of our state. And there's been times where I've sent myself to go look at bare ground on accident. I've sent myself to a rock as well. So until we get better LiDAR in this area, this will still speed up our process in image interpretation, as opposed to just slowly going through the imagery. So it'll at least clue us into potential areas of dead tan oak. And so we've already started using this process with our new imagery. Here in Oregon, we're still under pretty heavy COVID-19 restrictions. And so our aerial survey for this year has been postponed indefinitely. So we're not sure when we're going to be able to get up in the air again. And so definitely having this new workflow has been very helpful to be able to interpret this imagery faster and get those GPS points to then go ground check to continue our early detection and then treatments on the ground. Additionally, just in general, the Oregon Sunnoka Program has been trying to use new technology. Esri recently has their Arcgis online platform, and so using the tools that are in there to be able to share with the public as well as with cooperators where treatments are, where treatments have been completed, and how many treatments have been completed overall historically. So it's just been a great tool to utilize that. Additionally, we've been combining all of our GIS data with our financial data to be able to tell the story to our stakeholders of this is where we're putting the money on the ground and this is what it's buying us. And so that's been a great tool as well. So with that, again, thank you so much for allowing me to come and present virtually. It's nighttime here in Oregon, so I'm probably going to have a beer after this. So thank you, everyone.
You might be able to send questions by email. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. If we all talk very loudly, Sarah can answer our questions.
Got a roving mic here as well.
No, nothing.
Sarah, that was a great talk. Thank you very much. What is the success of the burning cutting program in terms of eradication? I don't think that came across.
Of the burning treatments. So, sorry, you kind of cut out there a little bit.
Yes. How successful has that been in the eradication process?
Yeah, and actually some of the other work that Devin Gatos conducted for her PhD project was looking at the effectiveness of our management treatment. So that is in the process of being published right now. But she found that in running the forecast simulations for the first 5 years of our treatment, so from 2001 to 2005, if we had not done any treatments, there would have been a 5-fold increase in disease on the landscape here in Oregon.
Hi Sarah, Emer O'Gara here. I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on why the host barrier was the least effective method.
One thing I forgot to, or didn't really highlight is with Phytopthora ramorum, it's an aerially spread Phytophthora. And so spores can spread up to 5 miles from the canopies of tan oak to tan oak. And so that's why we thought the host barrier was the least effective, is because of the aerial spread nature of this Phytophthora versus other soil-borne, soil spread Phytophtheras.
And on the aerial spread, you were making some comment about testing for molecular levels in the soil. So it's obviously in the soil and in the air, correct?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? It got fuzzy at the end.
One of the questions, one of the things you talked about in post-fire monitoring was the molecular levels in the soil. It's obviously in the soil.
Right. It is in the soil, and so Phytopthora ramorum forms long-term chlamydospores in the soil, and we haven't seen them as agents of spread in our from one area to another. So there have been studies in Oregon and in California where they can recover the inoculum in the soil, but we've never documented an instance where it's then gone on to infest a new area.
Sarah, what about this movement in streams in water? It is spread. And how much spread?
So we see streams as a way to monitor for the disease, but again, just like in soil, we've never seen an instance. And Ebba Peterson from Oregon State University did some work in this that was published back in 2014, I believe. But that we can pick up the spores in the streams through stream baiting, but we've never then seen infections leading out from the stream. We're always able, from those stream baitings, we do stream surveys walking up the streams, and we've always been able to find the source of that inoculum and then go in for treatment. And so we use it as an early detection tool before trees are red and dead and they're still sporulating.
I think we have time for a couple more, maybe. Anyone?
All right, thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. That was a fantastic presentation. Really topical to
Yeah.
where what a issue Phytopthora is, and yeah, the different technologies that we're using to start monitoring and modeling. Really interested to see that website when it comes live. Good luck.
And we wish you the
Thank you.
best of luck with the fires over there as well. So if we're going to all give
Yeah, thank you.